Historians commonly ascribe the failure of Operation Market Garden, the lack of logistic resources within 2nd British Army. The consequence of this was that when 30 Corps began its drive north to Arnhem and the North German plain beyond, the two flanking corps, without sufficient supplies, lacked the combat power for an all-out offensive. Thus, this pencil-thin corridor, or Hell's Highway as it became known, was fatally vulnerable to counterattack by the Germans. These German operations against Hell's Highway effectively choked off any chance of success that Market Garden had. But surely this is something that the newly promoted Field Marshal, normally so prudent with his logistic plans, would have fully appreciated. I have, however, a theory that may go some way to explain Montgomery's uncharacteristic behaviour in launching a major operation in less than favourable circumstance. On the 1st of September 1944, as was always planned, Field Marshal Montgomery handed over command of the Allied ground troops ashore in northwest Europe to General Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander. Montgomery, in the 3-month Battle of Normandy, had confounded his numerous and vocal critics by delivering with the Allied armies a crushing defeat on the Germans. And what is more, he had reached his D+90 phase line that he had drawn on the maps at St Paul's School back in early 1944, dead on time. During the first week of September 1944, the German retreat and the Allied advance across northern France into the east of the country and into Belgium continued. But there was a lurking problem. There was a limit to how far and how fast the Allied armies could go in pursuing what they regarded as a defeated and broken army.
Then it happened. Just outside Metz, we ran out of gas. And there just wasn't any to be had. I looked at my 30-ton Sherman sitting there, a useless hunk of iron. I wanted to bawl. I don't know how far we could have gone on, who knows. But I just stop and sit there in the road. I knew then we were in for a rough time.
As the inevitability of outrunning their logistic resources became apparent to commanders, virtually every one of them beat his way to Eisenhower's headquarters to explain how his plan, with him at the centre of it, would deliver a quick and easy victory in the West. Eisenhower, of course, had a big dilemma. He could no longer logistically support all of his army groups in action at any one time. But on the other hand, the prospect of grounding an army in favour of another, particularly if it was American and particularly if it was Patton, was politically unacceptable, because the United States was now the major player in northwest Europe in terms of manpower and of material. It was therefore an easy option for General Eisenhower to support the generally preferred US broad front strategy during the autumn of 1944. The plan that Montgomery advanced in a very tense meeting with Eisenhower aboard his personal plane on the tarmac at a Brussels airbase was audacious, and it certainly ticked more of the political boxes that would please the general's masters. What Montgomery was proposing is to cross and seize all the waterways in Holland, and a ground advance north would cut off the Germans in Western Holland and at the same time drive back the V weapons out of range of bombarding London. The plan also had the merit of outflanking the West Wall to the north and also putting the Allied armies on the more favourable terrain of the North German plain, from where they would have a reasonable chance of making a home run to Berlin and victory before Christmas 1944, a victory that the politicians so earnestly needed. While all this undoubtedly pleased Winston Churchill, Montgomery's plan to use 1st Allied Airborne Army, which had been newly formed, would also have pleased General Marshall, who wanted to see this very expensive asset being used. But, as we have seen, it would have never been politically acceptable for Eisenhower to pour all the logistics into the 2nd British Army in favour of an American formation. It is my contention that at that meeting where Montgomery aboard the aircraft was allocated 1st Allied Airborne Army, he was not afforded logistic priority, nor was he given all that he wanted. I believe, however, that the two senior commanders must have had a tacit or complicit acknowledgement that if this great gamble was a success and the Allied armies stood on the North German plain, Eisenhower would be forced to resource success. There is plenty of evidence to suggest that Montgomery was under political pressure all of his own. Churchill was demanding that the V weapons in Western Holland be driven back out of bombardment range of London because after 5 years of war, the population's morale was being severely undermined by these weapons. He was also exhorting Montgomery to get the war finished in Europe by Christmas 1944 because Britain was running out of financial and manpower resources. At the European level, there was another practical consideration that the Americans certainly didn't share, and that was the future shape of the continent. Churchill foresaw the long shadow that a Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe would cast, and that was another reason for Montgomery to be under political pressure to finish the war early. There were also personal factors at work during the planning for Operation Market Garden, and even the notoriously thick-skinned Montgomery had been stung by the personal criticism of his conduct of the Normandy campaign, despite its ultimate success. And also the newspaper man's map of the campaign was galling to Montgomery. On the left flank, the Anglo-Canadian armies, when they advanced and wheeled left to the east out of the bridgehead, had a relatively short distance to go in comparison with the Americans' long arrows, but against lesser opposition. Add to this already toxic mix the increasingly bitter competition between Eisenhower's senior commanders to be seen as the victor in Europe, and then perhaps it's slightly easy to see why a risk may well be taken for personal and national reasons of prestige. Cognitive dissonance was very much at work during the conception of Operation Market Garden. That is to say, the ignoring of unpalatable facts that don't fit the plan. The senior commanders had virtually all served during 1918 and had witnessed personally the German collapse and the pursuit back towards the German frontier. And with that in mind, of course, the risks inherent in Montgomery's Market Garden plan seemed that much smaller. If Operation Market Garden had been a success, then General Eisenhower would have had every political and military reason and excuse for pouring logistic resources into an Allied thrust with 21st Army Group and the more northern American armies around the top of the West Wall and into the heart of Germany, and an early victory in the West. Betting on success and taking a risk with the logistics is what Montgomery's great gamble was all about. The Market Garden series of DVDs by Battlefield History TV and Pen and Sword cover the entire campaign from the breakout from Joe's Bridge, Hell's Highway, Nijmegen, the island, Arnhem itself, and finally the evacuation.